I never imagined the house could feel this quiet. Not after all these years. Not after the echoes of birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and teenage arguments once filled every corner. But now, it's just me and the creaks in the hardwood floors. The wind outside brushes against the window panes like an old friend come to reminisce. The family estate, left by my late wife, Ruth, is too big for one man. Still, I stay. Not out of sentimentality, but duty. This house is the last thing that connects me to what we once had. At 68, with a back that reminds me of my Navy days and a mind that won't let go of the past, I've learned to live with the silence. Ruth's portrait still hangs in the foyer. I straighten it every morning. Not because I need to, but because it's a ritual that says I'm still standing. My oldest son, Darren, stopped visiting regularly after Ruth passed. He calls on holidays. Sends emails with too many bullet points. My daughter, Cynthia, is busy proving something out on the West Coast. Only Nathan, the youngest, checks in once a week. They all called him the soft one. Maybe he is. But at least he still gives a damn. Some nights, I sit by the window and wonder how a man can have a full house for decades and end up with so much space. Age doesn't soften the past. It sharpens it. Memories return like frostbite, biting, then numbing. You don't forget. You just get better at pretending. When I invited the family over for dinner, I told myself it was just that, dinner. Nothing more. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple evening. Something had shifted. It was in the air with quiet, heavy, waiting. The doorbell rang just after 5. Cynthia arrived first, high heels clicking against the tile. Behind her, her husband, always half distracted by his phone. Then Darren, with that measured smile he wears like armor. Nathan showed up last, carrying a pie he probably didn't make but brought anyway. They greeted me with hugs, but it felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced in the car. We gathered in the dining room. The table was dressed the way Ruth used to do it. White linen, silver cutlery, candles that weren't necessary but felt right. We ate in that overly polite way families do when there's unfinished business between them. Compliments on the roast, small talk about real estate, Cynthia commenting on the outdated wallpaper. Nathan tried to make jokes. Darren chuckled politely but checked his watch twice. Halfway through the meal, Darren leaned forward. "Dad, have you thought more about updating the will?" There it was. He said it like he was offering advice, not making a move. For legal clarity, he added. You know, just so there's no confusion down the line. I kept eating. Slowly. Knife. Fork. Chew. You wouldn't want us to fight later, would you? The room froze. Even the fireplace crackle seemed to dim. Cynthia looked down. Her husband adjusted his napkin. Nathan looked straight at me, jaw tense. In that moment, I didn't feel like a father. I felt like an obstacle. I didn't answer. I didn't trust what would come out if I did. My silence wasn't surrender, it was something else. A stillness before the tide shifts. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and brought in dessert. We ate the pie Nathan brought. No one commented on the taste. Later that night, after they'd left with their hugs and tight smiles, I went to my study. The air in that room always feels heavier, like Ruth never really left. I unlocked the safe tucked behind the bookshelf. Pulled out the folder marked Estate, Final Draft. I'd reviewed the will just 2 weeks ago. It was solid. Every clause in place. Especially the one that protected the deed, Ruth's clause. She insisted it stay with me until my death. She knew the value wasn't in the land but in the legacy. But tonight, the wording was different. The clause was gone. My stomach tightened. I flipped through every page. It was missing, cleanly, deliberately. No torn edges, no edits. Just absent. My mind went to the last lawyer visit Darren had arranged. Said it was to help me review things while I was still sharp. I thought he meant well. I really did. I sat there, the folder on my lap, heart beating steady but heavy. Maybe I should have shouted at him tonight. Called it out. But I didn't. I wanted to see how far he'd go. If they want to corner me, I whispered, I'll show them how a cornered man thinks. I thought that dinner would be the worst of it. But nothing, not even Darren's veiled threats, prepared me for what happened the next morning. The house didn't make a sound that morning, not a creak, not a groan. I woke before the sun had the nerve to rise, staring at the same ceiling Ruth and I once whispered under. I lay there for a while, letting the silence press in like fog through an open window. When I finally sat up, my back ached like it had been twisted by the weight of what happened the night before. I made my way to the kitchen, every step on the hardwood floor reminding me I was still alive, still here. I reached for the old brown ceramic cup, the one Ruth gave me on our 30th anniversary. Poured myself some coffee, and watched the steam rise in the dim light. My hand shook. I took a sip. Burnt, bitter. Didn't matter. The clock on the wall ticked like it was judging me. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual. Funny how when the shouting stops, the silence grows teeth. People say quiet heals. It doesn't. It just leaves you alone with the things you can't unhear. I found myself replaying Darren's voice. The tone, the phrasing, the forced civility wrapped around something colder. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't a threat, just a bad choice of words. Or maybe I was lying to myself because the truth was harder to hold. Rain tapped lightly on the windows, the gray light creeping in slow. That kind of morning always felt like something being washed away. Or revealed. I stood there in the kitchen too long. Eventually, I made my way back to the study. Something felt off. I'd left it clean the night before, paperwork in place, the folder tucked where it belonged. But now, the second drawer on the left was slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it. There was also a faint scent in the air, too sharp, too modern. Cologne. Not mine. I moved through the room, checking every inch with a careful eye. When I reached the family portrait, Ruth and I in the center, kids frozen in some version of happiness, I noticed the frame was crooked. I lifted it, and behind it, a small black device taped to the wall. A recorder. My mouth went dry. Not fear, but clarity. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. Darren didn't just want the world changed. He wanted control. Every word, every moment, recorded like evidence in a trial I didn't know I was in. I stared at the thing for a while. Didn't touch it. Just let the weight of that betrayal settle. This was an impulse. This was planning. Trust used to be a handshake and a man's word. Now it's whatever software you can hide behind a picture frame. I didn't rip it out. I left it where it was. Let them keep listening. You don't face a wolf when it's full. You wait until it's hungry. And then you make sure it doesn't eat you. I heard the doorbell around 11. Not many people rang that bell anymore. It was Mr. Kelman, my lawyer. Been with me over a decade. Gray suit, clean shoes, hands too smooth for the cold. He smiled the way men do when they're hiding something. Saw the rain, figured you might need help going over last night's mess, he said, stepping in before I could answer. We sat in the den. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase, thinner than mine. Said it was the updated draft of the will, one sent by Darren for my convenience. My jaw didn't clench, but my heart did. He talked like a man reading a script. Polite. Careful. Eyes never fully on mine. You're aware of the clause removal, correct? He asked, flipping pages without waiting for an answer. I said nothing. The new version streamlines property transfer. Should anything happen? That last part. Should anything happen? He said it like we were planning a vacation. You've been with me a long time, Kelman, I said, watching him closely. What changed? He hesitated. Just enough. Nothing, sir. Just efficiency. Loyalty, I learned, is a luxury some people sell by the hour. He left soon after. Didn't shake my hand. Just gave me that rehearsed smile and walked out into the rain. I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I got to work. I photographed everything, the will, his folder, my original. Labeled every file. Stored them on a flash drive and printed backups. I wrote notes, times, dates, even recorded my own account. Then I locked them all in a box, sealed it, and drove into town. The bank was quiet. The clerk didn't ask questions when I requested a new safety deposit box under a different name. I left the bank and stood in the parking lot, staring at the clouds. Then I pulled out an old flip phone, the kind I kept from my service days. Dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Eli," I said when the voice answered. "This might sound strange, but I think I've got something here. Something you'd want to keep an eye on." "Still good at keeping your back covered?" he asked. "I don't need cover yet," I said. "But the weather's changing." When I hung up, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt steady. I won't fight them with rage. That's what they expect. I'll fight with silence, calculation. The kind of fight they won't see coming. As I drove back, the mansion stood waiting at the end of the driveway, quiet, grand, and no longer safe. They weren't just trying to take the house. They were trying to erase everything it stood for. It started with a sound. Not loud. Barely there. Just enough to pull my attention from the photo frame I was staring at too long. A soft shuffle, directly above me. The attic. I hadn't been up there since Ruth passed. I didn't go near it. She used to call it the museum of things we've outlived. The idea of going back into that stale air, thick with dust and memory, made my chest tighten. But the sound, faint, deliberate, didn't feel like the house settling. Someone had been up there. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly, each step creaking under my weight. At the top, the door stuck a moment, like it didn't want to open either. When it finally did, a smell hit me, old paper, dry wood, and time. Furniture under sheets. Blankets yellowed with age. Boxes sagging under their own weight. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that whispered behind your back. I saw the rusted bike first, the one Darren broke when he was 11. The seat still torn. A stack of birthday cards next to it, faded ink, names from people long dead. Then I noticed the wooden box, pushed into the corner. It had a tag on it, in Ruth's neat handwriting, "Do not open." Everything was where we left it. Almost. A chair was turned the wrong way. A box I remembered stacking myself was now shoved further back. Footprints. Fresh, light. Not mine. I crouched by the box, ignoring the heaviness in my knees. Opened it. Just more junk. Or so I thought. At the very bottom, wrapped in a red scarf I hadn't seen since Ruth's funeral, was a leather journal. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't mine. But I knew the writing. Her journal. My fingers trembled as I opened the cover. The first few entries were soft. Updates about the boys. Notes about errands. Grocery lists, even. But 10 pages in, the tone turned. The language shifted from routine to rehearsed. "He's slipping," she wrote. I see it in the way he forgets names mid-sentence. Darren says it's time we step in before it's too late. Another page. I told the lawyer to update the trust. Quietly. He won't notice. Then. I don't feel good about this. But I feel less good doing nothing. What if he forgets the boys' birthdays again? What if he signed something dangerous? I sat down hard on the floor. The journal thudded closed in my lap. So that was the version of me she documented. Declining. Confused. Needing oversight. I'd made one mistake. One. And instead of telling me she was worried, she wrote it down. Let it fester on the page. My hands trembled. I opened the book again. More pages. More doubts. Notes about estate plans. Conversations she had with Darren without me. Phrases like just in case and safeguards. Not once did she confront me. Not once did she ask what was really going on. You think you know someone until their thoughts outlive them. I whispered it out loud. I sat there, in that musty attic, surrounded by things I thought were safe, and felt a slow kind of heartbreak I hadn't known before. Not the kind that comes from yelling or betrayal you can name. This was the quiet kind. The kind that sits next to you for years before you realize it's been cutting you the whole time. I went back downstairs without knowing how I got there. The journal stayed pressed against my chest the entire way. I sat at the dining table, stared out the window, but didn't see the yard. Was this how Darren learned to treat me? Was Ruth the first to plant those doubts? I started remembering things. Arguments that suddenly went silent when I walked into the room. Forms that Ruth asked me to sign, saying they were routine. Darren taking more responsibility than he needed to. Always offering help, always saying, "Dad, don't worry about it, we've got it covered." I thought it was love. Maybe it was strategy. The more I read, the more pieces started fitting into place. The journal wasn't just her thoughts, it was a blueprint. Not clear. Not cruel. But strategic. And that made it worse. I felt anger. But deeper than that, I felt stripped. I had lived so much of my life trusting people who saw me as a risk they needed to manage. My grip tightened on the leather cover. Then something cracked open in me. Not loudly. Not all at once. But like a beam shifting under weight. I stood up, wiped my eyes dry with the back of my hand, not because of tears, but dust. Went into the study. Pulled open the drawer where I kept the backup keys. If they wanted to manage me like a problem, I was going to be a problem worth managing. The lock on Ruth's file cabinet opened on the second try. I flipped through folders. Some were medical. Some were insurance. But behind the third divider, I found an envelope marked in her handwriting, "Personal, safe deposit box." Inside, a receipt. Dated 9 years ago. Ruth and Darren. Not me. I opened more files. Legal letters. Drafts of updated wills. One of them was signed but never filed. It named Darren as executor. Not me. I sat back in the chair, my heart steady now. That steady where you stop shaking, not because you're calm, but because you finally stopped denying what's been in front of you all along. I picked up my phone and called Lydia. Old friend. Paralegal. Smart enough to know when to speak and when to wait. It rang to voicemail. "Lydia," I said slowly, "I need to look into something. Something from years back. It's delicate. Call me when you can. Please." I ended the call. Stood. Walked upstairs again. Not into the attic, just up to the hallway window that faced the backyard. Rain painted slow, dragging lines on the glass. I wasn't confused anymore. Not scared. Not grieving. Just awake. The lights went out just as the sun began its descent. One moment the hallway was warm with late afternoon glow, the next everything dropped into darkness. Silence swallowed the rooms. I stood motionless, feeling the hush press in from walls and floorboards. A flicker, a hum, and then the blackout. No alarm, no warning. Only cold air and the echo of lost electricity. I felt for my phone, fumbled for the flashlight, and slipped down the darkened corridor. My heart pounded, not for the dark, but for what it might conceal. Then I heard it, creaking, slow footsteps below. In the basement. I paused. Every instinct told me to wait for backup, to call someone. But I had none left I could trust. So I pushed open the door quietly and descended. The basement was damp, the smell thick. In the dim glow from my flashlight, shadows shifted along the foundation walls. A trapdoor stood slightly ajar, as if invited. The radio behind it crackled faintly. The floor was uneven. I sensed movement, but didn't flinch. I came upon boxes upended. Storage items strewn. Against the far wall, a rope loop dangled from a beam, unused but ominous. My breath caught. A voice, cold, familiar, cut through the darkness. You never should have looked. Darren stepped into view, his figure blocking the stairwell upward. You think you can dig in the dirt and find what you want? He advanced, swaggering. Sign the deed. Or watch everything fall apart. His tone was unsteady, but the power behind it was real. I met his gaze. I won't let you take from me the one thing I built with Ruth. He snarled. Do not make me do this, Dad. He shoved me. It was a weak push, but enough. I stumbled, then tripped a wire across the floor. It snapped something in the beam. A panel swung open, revealing a narrow utility shaft. I grabbed the frame and pulled myself through just as Darren lunged. I scrambled up, breathing hard, as the door slammed behind him. I dared not look back. Back upstairs, I leaned against the wall, my heart a jackhammer in my chest. This isn't how I fight wars. But I will. I returned to my office. On the desk lay an envelope, slid underneath the door. I picked it up. The return address was Ruth's handwriting. Inside, paper with a letter claiming she wanted to give stability to those she loved. It asked that I sign over the deed for their sake. The signature looked shockingly familiar, too familiar. I held it there, staring at the ink, tracing the curves. The weight of betrayal doubled. Even in death, they write my demise. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo, front and back. Then I added timestamp and metadata, so no one could deny it. I emailed it to my legal counsel, verify authenticity. This arrived tonight. Sitting alone, I whispered, they want me to sign my own undoing. The walls felt close, oppressive. My hand shook slightly. Then I moved fast. I tucked the letter in my coat inside pocket. Took out the real deed and last validated will from my desk. Locked them into a tamper-proof box I'd rented in town. No one knows the code but me. I called Alex, our tech friend. I asked him to trace the letter's origin, IP addresses, postmarks, fingerprints. Be discreet. Be fast. I sat by the family photo, that one with Ruth, Darren, Nathan. My eyes lingered on her smile. You don't scare me anymore, I murmured. The night stretched ahead. Trust was dead. Strategy was born. I woke up before the sun. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't pretend to sleep anymore. My body was still, but my head never stopped. I sat in the kitchen with a lukewarm mug of tea, no sugar, no lemon. Just bitter and quiet. The same way the house felt. My eyes drifted to the spot above the mantel where a family photo used to hang, Ruth, me, the boys when they still called me Dad without strings attached. That frame was gone now. Replaced by some absurd modern painting Darren had brought in. Red swirls. Jagged lines. No heart. I stared at it and thought, how did I raise men who know how to hurt, but not how to love? I wasn't angry right then. I wasn't even sad. I was hollow. Like someone had scooped everything out of me and left a skin behind to sit in silence. There's a kind of grief that doesn't cry, it just stops speaking. I thought about packing a bag. Just walking away. Letting the house rot with its lies and echoes. But that's the thing about silence, it's easy. Until it starts to feel like surrender. Somewhere in the hallway, I thought I heard my name. Soft, drawn out. I didn't move. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I didn't want to know who still had the nerve to whisper me into the walls. I eventually made my way to the pantry, wasn't hungry, but needed motion. That's when I saw Marla. She'd worked here for years. Quiet. loyal. Kept her head down and her ears open. She looked nervous. Her hands trembled as she tucked her cleaning rag into her apron. "Sir," she said, not meeting my eye. "There's something I need to tell you." I stopped. "Go on." She looked over her shoulder, then back at me. "They've been recording you. Editing the audio. Making you sound confused. Out of it. They're trying to prove you're unfit." I didn't flinch. I just stood there. She went on, her voice cracking. "I heard Darren and Nathan talking about it in the study. They've got lawyers lined up. They want control of the estate. The whole thing. They said you're slipping." I should have yelled. I should have felt rage boil over. But all I felt was clarity. So I said, "Why now?" She bit her lip. I was scared. "But I can't watch this anymore." I nodded slowly. And then, without thinking, I hugged her. Not because I trusted her, but because sometimes the only honesty left is whispered in guilt. I left her there in the pantry and walked to the sunroom. It used to be Ruth's favorite place. Used to be filled with orchids, daisies, whatever she could coax from the soil. Now? Dead plants. Dry dirt. Dust on the glass. I sat in her old chair. The cushion gave a soft sigh under my weight. I picked up her gardening gloves, still in the drawer. Inside the left one, in faded Sharpie, was a quote, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Eleanor Roosevelt. And just like that, I remembered who I was, what I'd taught, what I'd endured. Not rage, not fire, but steel. Cold. Focused. I pulled out a small leather notebook. Wrote truth on the cover. Page 1, the forged letter. Page 2, Marla's confession. Page 3, the missing documents from the safe. I listed everything. Every whisper. Every shift in behavior. If they wanted a war, fine. They'd get one. But not the kind they expected. I wasn't screaming anymore. I was documenting. Later that day, I made the first move. I called my new lawyer. Told them to prep a defensive affidavit. Secure the surveillance footage. Track any suspicious financial transfers. Audit the accounts, every dollar, every timestamp. I wiped my home system. Backed up everything onto a private cloud. One only I could access. Then I found Marla again. Gave her a single instruction. Keep doing what you always do. But record everything. Every voice, every visit, every lie. She nodded without a word. As the sun started to lower, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. Looked myself in the eye for the first time in days. "You forgot who taught you how to survive," I said. "I'm still here." I slipped into the security room after midnight, shadows pressing against me like guilt. The hallways were still. I shut the door behind me and flicked on the flashlight. The monitors glowed faintly, with static. The screen showing the key camera feed blinked, then went blank. I inserted the USB drive I'd brought from my legal ally. It felt cold in my palm. My heart pounded as I navigated video folders, guided by memory of timestamps. The footage appeared, but it wasn't whole. A 12-minute gap. Deleted. All I saw was darkness in that missing stretch, nothing but silence where evidence should have spoken. I watched the remaining frames, Darren's silhouette at the doorway, door closing behind him, and then static. I rewound, played again. Same. The same missing chunk. I whispered, "They erased the proof. But they can't erase the memory of what I saw." I dug deeper, timestamps, creation logs, file metadata. I found traces of edits. The main files modified by user tag traced back to Kilman's office computer name. My throat closed. Betrayal sharpened into clarity. Then I cross-referenced the backup deeds I held. One version, dated months ago, revealed a smudge in Darren's name. The N had an extra flourish, faint but obvious. Someone had manipulated a letter in the signature. That smudge became proof. Not only were they editing video, they were altering legal documents. The betrayal was layered, legal, digital, emotional. I shut the monitors off, heart hammering. I gathered copies of logs, footage thumbnails, deed files with the smudge. I burned them onto encrypted drives. I waited in the dark outside Kilman's office, pacing, listening. When he finally arrived, late, heavy steps, I stepped out. He froze. Eyes wide. "You here late," he said. "I need answers." I held up a drive. "This was accessed from your system. Metadata says so. And this signature, I flipped images on my phone. Smudged. Altered." He paled. "You don't understand." I cut him off. "You threatened me before. Now you lie to me. You can threaten me, but you can't hide forever." His hands shook. He stammered, deflected. He warned me of collateral damage, legal ruin, reputation ruin. I stood firm. I'm past fear. I backed away into the hallway, careful. I scanned my surroundings. No cameras watching me. No hiding from memory. I returned to the study. I locked the safe. Slid the backups inside. Tucked the original ceramic cup, cracked from years, from betrayal, beside it. "Try to erase me," I whispered. They carved out the wrong gaps. Calmness settled over me. The storm inside grew quiet, but stronger. The next moves were mine. It was nearly midnight when Marla approached me again, this time with eyes more sunken than usual. She didn't speak at first, just handed me a key, small, brass, and warm like it had been clutched tightly for hours. "It's in the back of the pantry," she whispered. "Hidden under the flour bin." I waited until the halls were still. No footsteps, no movement from the upstairs bedrooms. I slid the bin aside and found the small lockbox, just like she said. Inside, a USB drive, marked with nothing but a red dot. No name, no label. I played it alone in the living room, volume low, heart racing. Her voice crackled through first, soft, almost apologetic. Then I heard them. My sons. Their voices casual, even amused. "Mom won't remember a thing once it's done." "You sure the lawyer's in?" "He better be. We're too close." They laughed. Laughed. About rewriting wills, manipulating my mother, staging conversations they knew I'd overhear. Marla had captured it all. And I had sat in silence, doubting my own mind, while they spun the web around me. I paused the recording. Closed my eyes. So I was right all along. That didn't feel like victory. It felt like a bruise starting to bloom, deep, slow, inevitable. But it also meant I wasn't paranoid. I was targeted. They wanted me silent. I would speak through their own voices. Morning came with headlines I didn't expect. A news segment aired, showing Darren at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a local shelter. The anchor praised his commitment to legacy and bravery rescuing the family's estate from disorder. Disorder. That was me. They painted me like some crumbling relic, too fragile to hold her place. Every word struck like a slap. I sat there, jaw clenched, tea untouched on the table. The temptation to fire back, issue a public statement, release the recordings, flared hot. But I knew better. You don't counter a narrative with panic. You wait until it's airtight. Until the floor beneath them cracks from their own weight. I opened my notebook and scribbled a single line. They built their stage. I'll wait for the curtain to drop. Later that afternoon, I checked in on my mother. She'd been quiet, docile, even. That wasn't like her. Not entirely. Her nightstand drawer was slightly ajar. Inside, among her prescriptions, was a small brown bottle labeled memory support. I'd never seen it before. I looked closer, no pharmacy label, no doctor's name. Just dosage instructions scrawled in shaky pen. Something clicked. I pulled up her medical records, no note of this prescription. No appointment scheduled around the same time. I checked the bottle's manufacturer. A supplement company, sure, but their listed compound? One used in mild cognitive interference treatments. My hands trembled. They weren't just rewriting papers. They were rewriting her. Stealing her memories. Her voice. Her mind. I took the bottle and placed it in my bag. My rage wasn't loud. It was precise. They didn't just try to steal my house, I muttered. They tried to erase her. I knew then I couldn't do this alone. Not fully. That night, I texted Soren. Haven't spoken in 2 years. We left off cold. But I knew he wasn't part of Darren's world. Not entirely. You ever feel like they're rewriting us? I typed. Not accusing. Just testing. He replied an hour later. I've been watching too. What are you thinking? I sent him a 30-second audio clip, just enough to show the tone. Not everything. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was short. If you're serious, I'll help. But don't lie to me. I didn't. I told him what I had, what I planned, what I feared. By midnight, we had a basic agreement. Share what we find. Wait to act until the pressure breaks. No surprises. I didn't trust him. Not completely. But I trusted that he hated being played as much as I did. Before I slept, I placed the cracked ceramic cup back on the nightstand. Still chipped. Still here. Still mine. I'm not alone anymore, I whispered. Then, after a pause. But betrayal tastes sweetest from those closest. A heavy knock pounded at the front door just as dawn's light began to creep across the lawn. It felt like the world shifted under my feet. I stood in the hallway, heart thudding, listening to footsteps behind me, Darren and Nathan, stiff, alert. By the time I reached the door, the sheriff had already arrived, badge gleaming, warrant in hand. The sons exchanged glances. Darren's face read confidence, too confident. I'm Sheriff Langston, he said to me. We received anonymous reports of elder neglect and financial irregularities. We have a lawful warrant to search this home. I nodded, masking panic with steadiness. They played innocence like a suit. Darren offered a forced smile. Nathan looked down at his shoes. The sheriff stepped into the foyer, deputy beside him. My blood cooled and fired at once. I recalled a line from Ruth, the day you lose your name to an accusation is the day silence becomes noise. They moved through the rooms, kitchen first, the library, our old family parlors. Every drawer opened, every file rifled through. The search felt intentional, precise. Nothing seemed random. I followed behind, pretending to assist, all while scanning their movements. My mind raced. During the inspection of the study, the sheriff and Darren spoke quietly. Their tones softly familiar. I paused behind the doorway and heard. Remember Willow Creek years back, the sheriff said. Darren answered, quietly, yeah. You were there. Their exchange froze me. Sheriff Langston and Darren, they knew each other. Old friends. My heart pounded with betrayal. The man with lawful power was part of Darren's world. I stepped back, turned on my phone camera discreetly, and recorded their words, their glances. If they planted anything, I would have the record to counter it. While the officers watched from upstairs, I slipped back to the basement. The old safe in the corner, the one I rarely touched, felt like my last refuge. I typed in the code Ruth taught me long ago. The compartment yielded a yellowed envelope sealed tight. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to me, dated 5 years ago. Ruth's handwriting, unmistakable. He knew. The letter detailed suspicions she carried before she died, that her sons were angling behind closed doors long before the will became contested. Under the letter lay the original deed, pristine, and a voice recorder containing an old tape. I felt heat and cold at once, relief, grief, vindication. They searched the house. They forgot to search the story. I tucked the letter and deed into my coat breast pocket, stepped up the stairs. Upstairs, the officers were wrapping up. The sheriff surveyed the rooms, nodded, and said, "We found no evidence of wrongdoing." Darren smiled with false ease. I met his gaze coolly. I sent a text to my lawyer. The basement gave me everything. While the search team filed out, the house exhaled relief, tension, satisfaction, fear. The day's justice knocked hard. But the true verdict lies ahead. For a week, I barely spoke to anyone. The house was too quiet. I found myself walking the same halls my father built, touching the grooves on the railings like they could still speak. But my mind stayed sharp. Every document, every file, every scratch of ink, I laid them out on the long table in the study like pieces of a puzzle only I knew how to solve. My lawyer came by most afternoons. We sat in silence, sometimes for hours, reviewing what I'd found. He didn't ask questions anymore. He just nodded and made sure every recording, letter, and timestamp was clean, court ready. I didn't confront my sons. Not once. Not a word. They moved through the house like men walking over ice they knew was about to crack. I let the tension do the talking. Justice doesn't yell. It waits. And that's how the appointment was set. One final meeting. The family summoned to the office of our longtime attorney, a man who watched us grow, fight, break, and rebuild over decades. He didn't ask for drama. He just opened the file and began to read. The office smelled of old leather and lemon oil. Heavy drapes muted the outside world. Across from me, my son sat, rigid, arms crossed, eyes darting. My granddaughter sat to my left. She didn't speak, just slid her hand into mine under the table. The will was amended, the lawyer said, days before Ruth's final decline. My name was listed as witness. His signature, unmistakable. The estate, contrary to prior drafts, wasn't to be passed to his sons. It was to be passed directly to her, my granddaughter. The only one who'd ever asked how I was sleeping. The only one who didn't try to take something. There was silence. Then it broke. Darren slammed his hand against the table. Nathan stood up like he was about to lunge. The lawyer didn't flinch. He simply raised his hand and pointed to the line in the legal code taped to the wall behind him. "You contest this in court," he said flatly, "and you'll do it without access to the estate." That was the moment it ended. For them. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I only turned to my granddaughter, and her eyes told me everything. We didn't win anything. We just stopped losing. That evening, I went out to the garden. The late sun stretched across the lawn. I carried the original deed in one hand, Ruth's letter in the other. There was a new tree planted by the eastern wall, one my granddaughter picked out. A dogwood. I knelt beside it, dug a small hole with my hands, and buried both items deep beneath the roots. The soil was cold. Damp. Real. I sat back on the grass and remembered a voice from decades ago. Ruth, sitting on that same hill, once told me, "Protecting you was my final vow." And even now, through papers and truth and time, he kept it. My sons left the mansion that night under the weight of legal barriers and sealed documents. I didn't watch them go. I was tired of endings. The next week, I found myself teaching storytelling classes at the local senior center. Nothing fancy, just 6 people and a dusty whiteboard. But I listened as much as I spoke. Some people just need a space to tell the truth out loud. My granddaughter moved into the mansion. She offered me the master bedroom. I declined. The room by the garden suited me fine. One morning, I stood by the window where I once felt trapped, hands bound, heart fractured. The light was different now. Not softer. Just clearer. I whispered into the stillness. My name was almost erased. But I wrote it back in ink. That's how this story ends. With legacy. With truth. With no more hiding.